All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos, and I have an interesting stream for you tonight. We're going to be talking about the devil's trick, what's referred to as the gender agenda and the death of Christendom. And so I have to give, before we get going, a special shout out to Father Deacon Dr. Ananias, FDA, who turned me on to a presentation, which we're going to be watching today in the second half of the stream, called the full title is Like a Wolf in Sheep's Clothing, the Gender Agenda. And this is a video, three-part series. One video, it's just 3 parts here on YouTube, put together by the Catholic Church, or at least the Catholic organization, rather, I should say. And it does a great job discussing some of the philosophical underpinnings of the gender agenda, which we are in the thralls of right now. This would be concerning homosexuality, minor attracted persons. And I've demonstrated before on the stream the promotion of bestiality coming out of academia, and of course the trans agenda, where they're giving puberty blockers and hormones to children and influencing young people to believe that they are the opposite gender. And so this video, which we'll be looking at, hits on so many different things that I've discussed in various streams on this channel. And I thought it'd be a great sort of a novel angle to kind of discuss it. And so one of the first and central points of today's stream is the metaphysical undercutting of Christianity through existentialism. So we've talked a little bit about existentialism and Jean-Paul Sartre and some of the French intellectuals, and of course his compatriot and some of their sexual fiascos, Simone de Beauvoir. She's going to be front and center in today's conversation, because what's central to their philosophical program is what they refer to as existence precedes essence. So you guys are higher IQ than the average bird, right? And so you guys understand human nature, human essence. Things have essences, substance, natures. And this is essential to our Orthodox or just any Christian understanding about humanity, because we can't have God incarnate unless there's a God nature, a divine essence. And we can't have the incarnation of God and the sanctification of humanity and the redemption of us through the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the ascension without human nature. And so throughout Greek philosophy, throughout obviously Christian history, we all sort of took the presupposition that there is essences, natures, and substance in reality, and that these precede existence, right? And we've talked about theologically with the logos and the logi and the divine principles of creation, as some of the church fathers refer them to. And so, what happens with existentialism, and just intellectually take you on a little bit of a historical, intellectual historical journey here, is when I did a whole stream with Father Deacon Dr. Ananias on metaphysics. I think it was almost 4 hours. So if you're not familiar with metaphysics, you think I'm talking about the book section in Barnes and Noble that tells you about crystals. We have a different understanding. Metaphysics, philosophically speaking, has to do with the discussions on the nature of being itself. Being, and that's a very big concept when you first hear about it, talking about philosophy. What we're talking about, what is being? That is really what metaphysics was trying to unearth. And we've talked about before with some of the early Greeks thinking it was water, it was air, it was fire. Then we get to Plato talking about the divine forms. And certainly as Christians, you can't categorize us as essentially Aristotelian or Platonic. We disagree with different attributes of both of those philosophical systems, and they're going to come up today. But for Christians and Platonists in general, there are forms, there are essences, there are natures that undergird our existence. And this is tied with our understanding of being. This is tied with metaphysics and how there is shih tzus and wolves and pit bulls and all this different, but there's dog nature. There's a category that pre-exists the dog itself that connects chihuahuas and gray wolves. There is a nature, there's an essence there. And so in the metaphysical stream that we did with Father Deacon Dr. Ananias, we kind of talked about Rene Descartes and what really becomes the continental and the analytic philosophical traditions. And this is a split on some of the founding presuppositions of how we obtain knowledge. And so when we get to Immanuel Kant and his critique of pure reason, what he's doing is really calling into question much of the metaphysical legacy of Western civilization. And Kant himself was Christian. He kind of made an argument for God based on his deontological ethical approach, kind of ethics and morals. But what he did is Rene Descartes begins his sort of metaphysical, his idealism, his rationalism from the point that he's a thinking entity, right? So he doesn't know about the external world. We can't know anything about external systems or external reality, but he can know that he's a thinking self. And then we have on the other side Francis Bacon, who really is the sort of progenitor of empiricism and the inductive method of science and all this different stuff. Well, then Kant, he undermines both these two lines of philosophical inquiry by saying, well, is the exterior world really totally knowable? And this is essentially the critique of pure reason. We're not going to get into all the details here, but what happens is philosophy has to rethink its program on how it comes to knowledge claims. And so you have what becomes the phenomenological methodology, which turns into German idealism after Kant and leads into phenomenology with Husserl and Heidegger and obviously Sartre. And he then is part of a system that he develops called existentialism. And this phenomenology is arguing that really we don't know the exterior world. All we know is our subjective personal experience. And therefore, why don't we begin philosophy with the study of phenomenology, the study of phenomena as experienced? And this is where we get into intentionality and consciousness and really subjective forms. And this is generally called continental philosophy. On the other end, what's part of the Anglo-American tradition is analytic philosophy, and that comes out of 19th century British empiricism. So in response to Kant, some of the British, the more scientifically minded, say, okay, maybe we don't know the exterior world in and of itself, but what we can do is use the scientific method and come as close as we can to what is knowable. And this leads into logical positivism and all this different stuff, which both ultimately collapse in the 20th century. Now, do they really collapse? No, we're Christians. We believe that there's a telos, there's an order to nature. You can use science. We can know the exterior world. There are essences in natures and creation. So we're part of this historical tradition that through centuries of philosophy has essentially been undermined. But once we get to the mid 20th century, um, with Sartre, he posits a revolutionary statement that existence precedes essence. And this is where Simone de Beauvoir and her Second Sex book, which was huge, considered really the founding tome of modern feminism, says that a woman is not born, but one becomes a woman, right? So you're not born a woman, you become a woman. Why was this significant? Well, because they're arguing that a woman is not rooted in some type of metaphysical essence or nature, but it's through existential exercise of the will that you gain your essence, you gain your identity. And this documentary that we're going to be looking at today is really moving us through the intellectual importance of these ideas and how, once we do away with essence and nature, which again, transhumanism is part of this general post-human, anti-human line, is that you get to redefine everything how you want. And the existentialism of Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir leads into the work of somebody like Alfred Kinsey. And if you're not familiar with Alfred Kinsey, you will be after today's stream. And he was an absolute degenerate. He was the father of what's referred to as sexology, and I am ashamed that he taught at the University of Indiana University here in Bloomington, Indiana, and this is where he held his sex department, in which he did atrocious things. And he was a married man, and this was more of a what's referred to as a beard. It's a covering. He was actually a degenerate homosexual and pedophile. We can say that. And a lot of the work that he did was trying to normalize these sexual orientations, moving from a sort of Freudian base, so that sex is a sort of repressed psychological dimension, and that we in society need to sort of normalize these aberrant forms of sexuality so that people can become more free. And this is where existentialism kind of dovetails into cultural Marxism, because when we look at our documentary today, they're going to be talking about some of these Marxist roots. Now, existentialism is not the same thing as critical theory. It's not the same thing as cultural Marxism, even though in the documentary, those are going to be used kind of synonymously. But I put together a document that again, will be up on the website for all the website members for $5 a month, in which it really provides a detailed overview of Simone de Beauvoir, Jean-Paul Sartre, what is existentialism, what is cultural Marxism or critical theory, how do things relate? And it really centers on the oppression, right? So Marxism, as you understand, Karl Marx, the whole thing was about economic oppression, right? So the bourgeoisie against the proletariat, the working class. Well, this structure of power dynamics and looking at the oppressed versus the oppressor, this framework is essential, because for existentialism and for the gender agenda, which we're going to be trying to uncover and discuss today, it is all about this idea that they have to undermine specifically Christianity, specifically the patriarchy, and specifically the nuclear family, so that humanity can liberate itself into a new orientation, a new man, right? Because essences in nature and all this theological stuff is all bunk for them. So this is really the thrust of, there's a lot of things that have led to the collapse and the death of Christendom, but we're witnessing it. And at the same time, we're witnessing its revival. As I said, multiple streams, Dyer shared an article, it's probably now about 3 weeks ago or so, on X, highlighting that Orthodox Christianity in America has moved from like 700,000 to about 7 million. That's a phenomenal increase just since 2020. That's in 4 years. And so as we're witnessing the death of Christendom, we're witnessing the death of Western civilization, which is really a spiritual death due to us moving away from God's intended telos of creation, the natural law, the natural order. that this is all part of a satanic agenda. And it's ultimately led and fueled by a sort of sexual revolution that re-understands and reforms anthropology as an entity that exists on a Darwinian evolutionary spectrum, and therefore you have no nature, you have no essence, you currently reside in your historical context, your evolutionary context, but we can then change these things. And that's what is the gender agenda. It ultimately is demonic, it ultimately is a trick by the devil. And the nuclear family is front and center of the attack. And we've already seen this stuff. The Democrats within, obviously, you guys know that the election's November 5th. You can't get away from it in American culture right now. But the recent ads by the Democrats is a guy masturbating in bed, talking about how they want to take away your pornography, him sleeping with a white, well, of course, it's a white male and a white female are having intercourse, premarital intercourse. He claims the condom broke. And then the Democrat ad is about Plan B and abortion so that they don't have children. And you may think that these are sort of just modern sentiments, that these things are just, not as pernicious as maybe I'm going to make them to be, but they really are. And the whole point, as what the documentary is going to uncover today, is that this is all rooted in a deep, deep hatred for Christianity and Christian metaphysics and the legacy of Christianity and its normalization of societal structure and the nuclear family. And so, what we're discussing, as I said, is a flip on Christian metaphysics. In that it's ultimately a sexual revolution against the mother of God. Because when we listen to Simone de Beauvoir, we listen to Sartre, we listen to Alfred Kinsey, which we're going to see today, what is one of the common denominators of all of them is that they hate everything that the mother of God, our Theotokos, embodies: purity, piety, virginity, chastity, and of course, family. So we look at the modern woman and we see the OnlyFans. We see the biggest thing that women want to vote for in America right now, typically single women, is for their reproductive rights. But what rights? These aren't rights, because what are rights? This is something that Andrew Wilson has talked about, but they use the rhetoric of rights, and it's not about reproduction. It's about the lack of reproduction. Because again, there is no human nature, there is no ontology to who you are. And so the unique qualities of women, their sexuality, their ability to give birth, their ability to be caretakers and mothers and stewards of life, these things are annihilated in the face of the gender agenda. And so we can see the demonizing of motherhood, the demonizing of marriage. I recently just saw that Time magazine, which we're going to see was a major promoter of Alfred Kinsey's pedophilic research, where they would literally masturbate children at like 5 months old. They were doing this in a laboratory. They were masturbating children. And we're going to find in the documentary one example of a girl who was being molested by her father, and Alfred Kinsey was paying him for the research on how quickly she could orgasm as a child, as like an 8-year-old girl. This is the type of stuff that Alfred Kinsey was involved with. And so Time magazine just posted at least I saw on X, the front cover of it was about how true freedom is not having children. And it shows two a white couple, a white male and a white female, laying on the beach, childless, enjoying their lives, enjoying the fruits of what? Consumerism, materialism, which is going to be a feature that roots existentialism and cultural Marxism together. And so it's undermining, and they're specific about it, especially when they start talking about these feminist meetings they had in the mid 20th century, that they have to undermine the Christian patriarchy. And the way that they want to undermine the patriarchy is through the nuclear family. They literally state this, that the ways in which you take away man's collective power in society is to take away his importance within the family. So we see the attack on fatherhood. We see the no-fault divorce in America and what really Western civilization. This isn't by accident. These people are infiltrating institutions. This is part of the Gramsci Marxist method, is that you infiltrate so that you can coordinate and then maneuver the institutions to fit your ideology. And that's exactly what's occurring. And so This is literally rooted in a spiritual war against God's creation. That's the whole intensive purpose here. And we can see the archetype of Baphomet, right? The half animal, half man, half male, half female. This is part of both Simone de Beauvoir and John Paul Sartre and Alfred Kinsey. They're all for minor attracted persons. Bestiality. Simone de Beauvoir even made the point that there's nothing wrong with bestiality because man himself, collective entity with no essence, is only an animal. And therefore, they make philosophical arguments in their radical feminist existentialist school that really there's nothing wrong with having sex with animals. Everything, again, that's in opposition to our tradition, but we can see something of the archetype of the Baphomet, the Jezebel, the harlot, the Lilith figure, that this is the attack, and the way that the evil one is going at man is really the attack on women. And so we've talked about this before. Obviously, the pornography, the sexual gratification through social media, the OnlyFans, these girls making millions of dollars a month by selling themselves online. This is a selling of your soul. That's what's happening. That's what we all do when we're committing these sins over and over and over again. But we're living in a time in which these people in the early 20th century literally said the only way that they can destroy the Christian patriarchy of America, which really just is symbolic of the whole Western world, is by promoting sexual promiscuity, premarital sex, homosexuality, and aberrant forms of sexual expression. That by doing this, the women will follow suit, which we've seen obviously has played that course out. The men will be led, especially in a world with no meaning, a world with no orientation through the church, a culture that's divorced from God, that the men will then follow their sexual desires. And this really is, my argument here is that culture, what we're witnessing in the Western world, really is a sexual magic ritual. Sex magic is happening in our face, whether it be, we talked about the symbolism of the Lady Gagas and the Beyoncés and all these pop stars in the world, right? But the whole thing is about inflaming sexuality, getting women to create their identities based off their sex, and getting men to be so lustful and gluttonous that they will fall into this magical self-destruction of our own societies, our own communities, and our own families through sex. And sex is, according to Freud and according to Alfred Kinsey, sex is this sort of ultimate energy that's budding up within men and women, and for them has to be released from the oppressive confines of Christian morality. But really, for what I'm arguing, and the documentary makes a point of how Aleister Crowley and various people working in the occult were part and parcel of this movement, because it is a magical ritual of us getting to destroy ourselves, because sin is death. It quite literally is. When we sin, we are dissipating the uncreated energies of God, and we literally are killing ourselves. And when we look at Western civilization, the whole thing is self-destructive. The whole thing is about killing itself, whether it be, look at whatever you want. It could be the food. Look at the medicine, big pharma. Look at the military industrial complex. Look at the economy and the US dollar. Everything is self-destructive. Everything is inverted. And the inversion of God, the inversion of justice, and the inversion of morality is one of the things that is going to be mentioned in this documentary, that is explicitly part of Satanism and part of their agenda. And so this is all a blurring of distinction. This is all blurring of boundaries. And this is why metaphysics really is the central battleground of how Christendom is being deconstructed and is dying before our eyes. And it takes men and women to fight against it by getting married, having families, and living Christian values. And that is a generative effect, right? When we talk about generation and generosity in the book of Genesis, it all relates to creation. It all relates to something growing. And ironically, the gender agenda, we see that gen, that prefix, that point that all these words connect to, that gender is being weaponized, inverted, and is literally leading to the death of people through the gender of gender. It has nothing to do with creative processes. It has nothing to do with the promotion of life. It is literally satanic. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So smash that like, guys. I want to show you a little bit of my document before we get going here. And then we're going to be watching the rest of this documentary called A Wolves in Sheep Clothing, The Gender Agenda. And it's, again, a Catholic documentary, but it is very good and well done. And it even brings up the COOF. We may have to skip a few sections of the documentary, but here's the document that I put together. And we're not going to read the whole thing. This will be up at the website, again, for members for $5 a month. So if you want access to this, please go to my website, become a website member. It's $5 a month. Here's the link right here, and I'll promote that in just a second. But this kind of gives an overview of the philosophies of Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre, the key tenets of existentialism. Existentialism is a philosophy focused on individuals' experience of freedom, choice, and responsibility, right? Which is they're couching in this agenda. Again, that's why existentialism is actually subversive. Not that we don't have free will and liberty and choice. And of course we believe that, but that's part of our imago Dei. That's part of being made in the image of God. For these people, this is a way in which they can talk about any sort of moral confine, any moral restriction our society places on them as something that needs to be liberated from. So it emerged in the 19th and 20th centuries, primarily through thinkers like Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Heidegger, and then later Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. It is deeply concerned with the subjective nature of human experience and the challenges individuals face in creating meaning in a world without inherent purpose. Existence precedes essence. We just highlighted that this is a central metaphysical doctrine of existentialism. And you could point out Marxism, anything that is based in this sort of relativity and this new anthropology posits that there is no essence, there is no nature, there is no substance to the world, and that existence is a chaotic expression of biology and matter, and therefore essence is something that we create. There is no essence. Radical freedom and responsibility, alienation and authenticity, absurdity and search of meaning, death and finitude. And then here's Marxist cultural theory, how those things relate. And then these are the points in which they really come together: freedom and alienation, authenticity and class consciousness, critique of bourgeois culture, which really was a critique of Christian morality, the role of culture, and then revolutionary potential. And so the existentialist Marxism and critical theory, I have a little bit of an overview here. Here's a little bit about how, again, the gender agenda plays into Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir's work. So homosexuality, de Beauvoir and Sartre's perspectives on homosexuality aligned with their existentialist belief in freedom and individual choice. De Beauvoir herself experienced relationships with both men and women, advocating for the legitimacy of same-sex relationships at a time when such topics were largely taboo. Sartre, while he did not focus on homosexuality specifically, viewed all sexual relationships as part of an individual's right to express their freedom and autonomy. Unconstrained by societal norms, these views, especially Beauvoir's encouragement of same-sex relationships as an expression of personal identity, i.e., again, this sexual magical ritual is getting people to create their identity through their sexual proclivities, right? We've talked about how trans identity, furry identity, homosexuality, minor attracted persons, that what's happening in our culture right now, the gender agenda, is getting people to identify who they are, their quote unquote, the essence of who they are, divorced from being made in the image of God, but tied with their sexual proclivities. And this was at the core of what their goal was. And so same-sex relations as expression of personal identity and freedom are at odds with traditional Christian teachings, which view homosexuality as incompatible with biblical teachings on sexuality and marriage. What about pedos and bestiality? In a controversial light, de Beauvoir and Sartre's legacy is complicated by their permissive attitudes towards certain practices that are broadly condemned in society. Oh, really? What are those? In the 1970s, they were among a group of French intellectuals who signed petitions calling for the decriminalization of certain sexual behaviors, pedos, including with minors, under the assertion that such laws restricted personal freedom and were repressive. You see how the game works here. Anything that butts up against this degeneracy is viewed as oppressive. Therefore, they're the oppressed, and the oppressor, the Christian hegemony of our culture, that needs to be deconstructed. This has been widely criticized, with many arguing that it contradicts contemporary values around consent and the protection of vulnerable individuals. From a Christian perspective, these permissive views stand in opposition to the sanctity of the person and the concept of moral responsibility. As Christian ethics hold that sexual activity should respect the dignity and well being of all individuals, particularly minors, within the context of marriage. I should have added that. And then here's my little discussion on existence precedes essence and why that is so important and how it contrasts with Christian metaphysics. Again, this whole document will be up at my website for anybody who's interested. So smash that like. And if you want to get access to all these notes that I've been creating, they're up at my website for $5 a month. So a few of them is the origin of meaning and purpose, freedom and responsibility. What is freedom? Freedom is our free will to align with God's will. Essence of human nature, ethics and morality, view of the soul. These are a few things that are at odds. And then I have a little overview of the sexologist Alfred Kinsey, a total degenerate that was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. If you're not aware, of course, was backed by the Huxley brothers, the eugenicists, and them being Fabian socialists, all that different stuff. And so Kinsey's work, who's going to be a very prominent feature in today's video, it comes out of positivism and empiricism. So Kinsey approached sex from a strictly empirical standpoint, although really it was a cover for his own degeneracy and that he could probably participate in these things. He forged his evidence. So like one of the things on his work right here, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male in 1948. Again, this is right after World War II, guys. This is very early, before the counterculture and all that different stuff in the 60s, although it was the catalyst for it. This is, again, an under-discussed dimension of the trans fiasco and the gender agenda and these LGBTQ movement within our current society. But Kinsey basically got like 300 people from prisons that already were like sexual deviants to do his research on. So the pool of which he built his entire work on how homosexuality was natural and that people had these repressed sexual feelings for children and all this different stuff, and that children can have orgasms as early as 5 months old. This is what he was doing in his laboratory, and he was choosing a sample pool of participants for his research that were already sexual psychopaths in many different ways. So all his books, the evidence that even he produces is called into question because he forged the numbers and he created all this different stuff. So it comes out of empiricism, sexual as empirically studied, right? And then it's tied with Freudian theory. So while Kinsey wasn't strictly a Freudian, it parallels Freud because of its emphasis on sexuality as a fundamental aspect of human life and personality. Freud's theories of repressed sexuality and the importance of understanding the unconscious may have provided, it did provide, I'm being generous here, Kinsey with a philosophical framework for destigmatizing and normalizing diverse sexual expressions. And then, of course, social Darwinism and the concept of natural behavior. Kinsey viewed sexual behaviors as natural biological impulses. This is, again, existence precedes essence. This is the message today. If you can take anything away from this stream, remember that these people believe that existence precedes essence, which is totally contrary to our Christian metaphysics. And so they are free from inherent moral constraints because there is no nature, there is no objective moral law. His research aimed to demonstrate that many sexual behaviors considered taboo were actually natural and part of a broad spectrum of human sexual diversity, similar to variations found in other species. Yeah. And so the controversial aspects of his research, the data on sexual experiences of children. So like in table 34 in sexual behavior of the male, details data on the sexual experiences of children, including infants. The table includes information about children as young as 5 months old, as I said, documenting their reactions to various sexual stimuli, meaning in a laboratory setting, these people in the name of science, masturbated 5-year-old or 5-month-old children. Absolutely horrendous and heinous. And so, guys, just based on what I've said so far, please smash that like, because wouldn't be surprised if this stream got potentially taken down, even though I'm going to try to keep it very philosophical and not get into any sort of intense rhetoric that may be flagged by the algos. But if you support this work, guys, please like this stream. If you like my research and you appreciate these streams, send in a super chat, a question, a comment, just a voice of appreciation. I would greatly appreciate that, because I generally don't know how this stream will be taken by the algo and our YouTube overlords, our Google overlords, discussing this topic. But this is a fact when I'm talking about with Alfred Kinsey. And anyway, he justified this by arguing that he was merely recording scientific observations. And his table includes, again, how quickly a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, both male and female, can orgasm. All this atrocious stuff that, if you do believe that maybe we're ruled by satanic elite that preys upon children because they're so warped and divorced from God that their absence of a soul wants them to sexually violate the most innocent pieces of our civilization, then you can kind of see how Alfred Kinsey's research may kind of make sense. So, promotion of sexual diversity, including homosexuality and bestiality. Yeah, this was part of Kinsey's work. So Kinsey's research was among the first in the U.S. to approach homosexuality as a common variant of human sexuality rather than as a mental illness or criminal behavior. And of course, he also his framing contributed to the slow but growing acceptance of homosexuality, despite the stigmatization it faced at the time. And of course, bestiality was also addressed in Kinsey's work, particularly in male sexual behavior data. Kinsey reported that a small percentage of men admitted in engaging in sexual acts with animals, which he presented without significant moral condemnation. Transgenderism and sexual nonconformity, even though he didn't explicitly embrace transgenderism, and those surgeries really didn't occur till the 80s. He promoted the normalization of these types of sexual expressions. And so his research minimized binary gender distinctions, emphasizing that both men and women were capable of a wide range of sexual behaviors. And this view indirectly challenged and gendered sexual norms of his time and laid an intellectual foundation for later debates on gender roles and identity, of which we are currently listening to today. So shout out to FDA. Said, did you watch the documentary I sent you on all this stuff a while back? Yes, FDA. I already gave you a special shout out right at the beginning of today's stream. And God willing, YouTube doesn't take the stream down, we're going to be watching large sections of that documentary. So a major thank you to FDA. I was not aware of this documentary. Again, it's a Catholic documentary. But it really hits on all this stuff. And so that's why I wanted to kind of put this in writing in a document, a real strong overview of existentialism, Simone de Beauvoir's work, Jean-Paul Sartre, Alfred Kinsey, and how all this relates to an undercutting of our Christian metaphysics and our Christian society. So, he said it's really good. It really is. It's Catholic, and it has a reference to Fatima and all this stuff. So take that with a grain of salt, however you feel about those things. But as a documentary trying to expose the sort of philosophical underpinnings of the gender agenda and how it's undermining Christianity and the death of Christendom, it does a phenomenal job. I would say one of the best religious documentaries I've seen on it. I've watched a couple more Protestant evangelical takes, and it has to, it doesn't get, it really never, those documentaries that I've watched, and I could be wrong, there may be some really good ones, they really don't address the philosophical heart of this whole debate, which this documentary does. So we'll be checking that out in just a few. But lastly, concerning Kinsey, was his research practice and ethical controversies. Kinsey's methods have been criticized for ethical breaches by today's standards, including a lack of informed consent. Can you imagine maybe masturbating a 5-month-old baby lacks informed consent? coercion, and a lack of oversight. He often conducted interviews in ways that critics argue were psychologically invasive, pushing subjects to disclose private or potentially traumatic experiences. Additionally, Kinsey's approach to data collection was often opportunistic, involving interviews with prisoners, sex offenders, and others who may not have been free to give fully voluntary consent. Critics have argued that these methods compromise the integrity of his data, no doubt about that, and raise questions about the moral responsibility researchers have to their subjects. And mind you, because of the type of research that Kinsey wanted to get involved with, he was backed entirely by the Rockefeller Foundation. Now, Kinsey, at this point, when he was first hired by Indiana University, he was a nobody. But the type of research, now he was already a sexual deviant, but the type of research that he wanted to do corresponded with the intentions of the Rockefeller Foundation, which anybody who's listened to dire streams on the global elite is going to be familiar with them being a major player in the intentions of globalism, the establishing this sort of new world order, if you will, this satanic inversion. And so it's amazing that it's clear as day that the Rockefeller Foundation just funded this thing outright, and that this is what gave him such a prestige. And the university didn't want to undermine his sex laboratory because they're getting in millions of dollars through the Rockefeller Foundation. Yeah, again, yes, exactly. Tavistock is also backed by Rothschild. Exactly. And the Tavistock is going to be a point in which Aldous Huxley and the Huxley brothers were participating in this research during the same time of Alfred Kinsey, before the public knew anything about this kind of stuff. So you're absolutely right. Thank you for mentioning the Tavistock. So that's kind of, again, this is my little overview of Alfred Kinsey stuff, how the differences in metaphysics between existentialism or existence preceding essence, and the work of Simone de Beauvoir, existentialism, and Jean-Paul Sartre. So again, that's going to be up at the website for anybody who's interested in that. So check that out if you guys want to read that whole document in its entirety. It is a great overview, and that's my goal, is for some of these topics is to create documents that if you want to learn more about it, I like to read more than I like to listen. That one, I can read faster than I can wait on somebody to say the word. So I'm like that. I'd rather read something than hear it, just because I can get through it quicker. But if you want to read that whole document, it'll be available at my website. So again, smash that like. It looks like we got one super chat here on YouTube. Justin Henley throws in $2. Thank you so much, Justin Henley, for all your support, brother. He says, good to see all you champs. Well, good to see you, Justin. Thank you very much for your support. And nothing over on the Streamlabs. And let me just check the Dono chat real quick. Dono chat, we got 2 generous super chats that came in. $20 comes in from MK. He said, good topic, broski. Thank you very much, MK, for that. Do appreciate it. And Justin Henley threw in $20, no comment. Thank you so much, Justin, for all your support, brother. And First Person Q just donated 5 COTEL Crew memberships. Thank you very much, First Person Q, for that. God bless you, brother, and welcome. Rip, he was gifted a membership. JFW, Austin DeTulio, Gale 552, and Tiffany Angel. So you guys give a special thank you to First Person Q for giving you guys COTEL Crew memberships. Thank you very much, First Person Q, for the support. I do appreciate it, my brother. And real quick, the same rigmarole as I always got to do, guys. Married man here trying to pay some bills. If you guys would like to support my work, one of the best things you can do is go to my website, become a website member. As I said, all these documents are available for the $5 a month. I got, I think, 8 of them up now, somewhere around there. And of course, we have different memberships. We have a private think tank that meets every second Thursday and fourth Thursday of each month. Join if you'd like to get access to that. Also, if anybody wants to sign up for a one-on-one session where we can go over any topic your heart desires in a private Zoom session, you can sign up there. And also, if you have a good topic you'd like me to do for a stream, feel free to sponsor a stream with this link right here. It's another great way to support my work. And I will message you back, and we'll kind of go over the details of what topic it is you would like me to research and perform here on the YouTube channel. And so again, here is what some of these documents look like. So for $5 a month, guys, you can get access. Here's the video library. Let me go to the front page. And I've had like 3 or 4 streams taken down. Those are all available here. So I've had Blinded by the Stars, um, Progressive Regression, Reflecting with Father Peter Hears. Those were all recently taken down. And so I got 6 documents plus the 7th document would be today's gender agenda. So if you want access to that stuff, just go to the website. $5 month membership will get you access to that. And also, if you have been interested in some of the eschatology stuff that we've been discussing recently, feel free to join us over at the Eschaton Vigil. It's a non-for-profit Orthodox organization I'm working with that is translating the visions of the saints and recent church elders into English for the very first time. So please join us and help our non-for-profit. It's called eschatonvigil.org. There's hundreds and hundreds of prophecies that have already been translated. If you'd like access to all that stuff, it's on that website, including Russia Before the Second Coming, which is now available on the website for purchase. And I'll be doing a sponsored stream on that very soon, covering the important book, Russia Before the Second Coming. So check that stuff out. And then lastly, if you're in the market for some Orthodox items, feel free to check out orthodoxdepot.com. Use promo code COTEL. They got icons, prayer robes, incense lamps, whatever you want, necklaces. Use promo code COTEL. It's a good way to help me out as well as a good Orthodox company here in the Midwest. So with that being said, guys, now let's kind of get into today's stream. So first thing I want to do is bring up our documentary here, right here. And so we'll be watching this. I believe I should be good to play this on our stream because it's uploaded by Kenneth Ray Parsad. This is not the Catholic network that created this documentary. And so based on it being up on a private channel, I assume that this is good to go without copyright claims. So God willing, that is the case. So if we do get flagged by any copyright, I will let you guys know and we will go to Rockfin, but I assume everything should be fine today. And this is a 3-parter. So the first part is we'll be going over 40 minutes or so. Then we'll do part 2 and part 3. And we're going to speed it up at 1.25 to try to get through this whole thing. But again, the 3 major figures that you want to keep in mind if you're not familiar with and you want to dive deeper: Simone de Beauvoir. She's the bisexual, you could argue atheist, degenerate leader of radical feminism and the sexual revolution. Jean-Paul Sartre and his existentialism, who was tied at the hip with Simone de Beauvoir. They were lovers, but also had an open relationship and were open to homosexual expressions of that relationship. And of course, Alfred Kinsey. As I said, this man right here is the scourge of my state of Indiana. It is the most reprehensible things I can think about. Indiana University in Bloomington. And during the coup, during the lockdowns and everything that was going on in 2020, miraculously, large donations were made to erect a statue of Alfred Kinsey and his pioneering research at the university, which I'm sure gets desecrated regularly by students who are aware of the degeneracy this man put forth. But if you're not familiar, you're going to become familiar. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So with all that being said, now let's kind of just begin our meandering through our documentary today, A Wolf in Sheep's Clothing, the Gender Agenda. And so let me make sure that we're connected.
What has happened to our world? Why are so many people suffering and confused? Why is there so much death?
And before we get going, we had a few more super chats sent in. Thank you guys very, very much. MWB Stories and Book Reviews throws in $50. Thank you so much, my brother. And he says, thanks for your great research, DPH. Well, thank you very much for your support. I truly do appreciate it. God bless you and your family. And Bruce Roberts throws in a generous $20, says, great work as usual, brother. And thank you very much, Bruce. Do appreciate it. God bless you guys, and God bless your families. Thank you for the support. And God willing, nothing happens and this stream isn't taken down, but we will see. I think it's on the edge, but I think as long as we maintain a sort of philosophical disposition towards the topic, I think generally we'll be okay. And then Dennis in South Carolina throws in $15 and says, June 27th, 2024, state government LGBTQI plus rights are human rights, and our government has a responsibility to defend them, to promote them here and everywhere. Blinken. Exactly. And I'm sure you guys already know about Anthony Blinken and maybe his orientation towards these topics and what groups he's a part of. I will not say any specifics, but absolutely. And this is by eradicating individual or human nature in essence. There is nothing there. It's all existential will, and therefore rights are granted by the government. The government fills the place of God. We've talked about this before, kind of a no-brainer. And therefore the government acting as God can create rights that violate the natural laws of creation itself. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. Aaron throws in $20. Thank you so much, brother. He says the store needs a sleeveless dry fit for the Ortho Gym Bros. Hey, that's not a bad idea. I'll have to think about that. Thank you very much, brother, for the $20 super chat. I do appreciate it. Okay, let's check this out now. Let's get through this.
Why have we abandoned so much of our history and our tradition? This hasn't happened overnight. It's taken centuries to tear down Christian civilization and God's laws, which have been followed since the beginning of time. But what is the greatest attack we face today? What is it, and where is it coming from? For 2 centuries, the ideologues of socialism or communism have used deceptive word jugglery to rebrand themselves as liberals or progressives, becoming wolves in sheep's clothing. Wolves who have infiltrated our institutions with the Gnostic cultural Marxist movement that has reordered our traditional biblical understanding of nature, marriage, and family. Paul Kengor is a professor of political science at Grove City College, executive director of the Center for Vision and Values, and visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. He is an acclaimed New York Times bestselling author of over a dozen books. His book, Takedown, is a shocking chronology of how the far left has sought to destroy traditional sex differences, marriage, and family, culminating in its embrace of same-sex marriage.
So really, in the end, what is the agenda? What's the goal here? And the agenda is basically that ye shall be as gods. So they in the role of God, small g gods, because when you can come up with your own definitions of things that heretofore had been the total province of the laws of nature and nature's God, and you render unto yourself the ability to redefine something that heretofore God had defined that, and you say that you can now do that. Well, here again, back to the Garden of Eden, this is the first mistake. Ye shall be as gods. So you are making yourself your own God. And I cannot do that. I'm going to have enough to answer for. That's one that I don't want to have to answer for. The most fascinating and frustrating thing about cultural Marxism is that people don't even know what it is. And a lot of people that are pursuing those ends have no idea of it. So if you go up to somebody and say, this is really a kind of a Marcusean, Antonio Gramsci, Wilhelm Reich, sexual revolution, Frankfurt School kind of cultural Marxist thing you're doing here, they'll look at you like you're out of your mind. Cultural Marxism today is more often referred to as critical theory. And there are many colleges in America that have critical theory programs and departments. In fact, our president of fundamental transformation, Barack Obama, went to Occidental College, which has a department of critical theory and social justice. Queer theory, phrase that they use. All of this, which falls under the umbrella of critical theory. In a way, I like the phrase critical theory better than cultural Marxism, because really what they're doing is criticizing everything. And everything that, at least...
I'm really sorry. God bless Derek. I just saw Derek Franklin in the chat said to pray for his sister Melissa. She's now a trans man and has gone no contact with my whole family. And that, you know, God bless you, Derek, and God bless your family. And we'll be praying for Melissa. Hopefully she self-corrects. But the fact that she goes no contact with the family, this is part of, again, this agenda right here that's going to be presented in the documentary, because the nuclear family, as it exists within the Western context, and even more, again, subtle differences with Islam, or you can have multiple wives and all, it's between one man, one woman becoming one flesh and building a household with children. Obviously, you have aunts and uncles, extended family, and we've already seen the extended family has been destroyed. But now the nuclear family, the last vestige of the Christian family, is being destroyed. And this is why you see these TikTok, I forget the names of those the weird trans dude that wears the makeup, looks like he's dying. That he always tells these young kids that go to his Patreon as young as like 8 years old to contact him to have private conversations so that he can let them know that there's nothing wrong with them. And maybe it's time to go non-contact with your family. He, in one video, I think it was like a 13, 14-year-old kid he told to go non-contact with his family. But the family, and it's the obvious life-creating process of sex between a man and a woman is so vile to these people that destroy their soul through the sexual sin and adopt this weird agenda, is that they can't be associated with it, that the family itself is something that needs to be destroyed. And I think it's part and parcel of all these people going no contact with their own families who get involved with it. So anyways, God bless you, Derek. And God bless anybody out there who may be having a family member who's struggling with some of this demonic attack.
Heretofore existed as what we understood in the Judeo-Christian West as a moral absolute. And what they really mean by critical in terms of critical theory is destroying. So not even just criticizing it, but redefining it, taking it down, destroying it, deconstructing it, taking it apart. They took classical Marxism, which under Marx and Engels was an economic model. The cultural Marxists took all of this and looked at it not through the prism of economics and class, but through culture and sex in particular. They established, of all things, a form of Freudian Marxism. Culture would be the goal. Culture, 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 sex, 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 education, education, education. For them, their world could be the university classroom. That's where the cultural revolution could and would take place.
This film tells a story of a number of new wolves in sheep's clothing. Ravenous men and women who seek to destroy our faith and future. False prophets with a clear and present gender agenda to destroy our families and corrupt our children by redefining the very nature and sacred dignity of being a man and woman made in God's image and likeness. Let us begin. By their fruits you will know them. Simone de Beauvoir was born in 1908 into a Paris, France, middle-class home. Her father, Georges, was a staunch atheist. Her mother, Françoise, a devout Catholic. Simone, as a child, was openly religious. For a time, she even considered becoming a nun. As she grew older, she grew closer and closer to her father. Though ironically, she claimed her father never once embraced her. Simone thinks like a man, her father constantly boasted, and which she enjoyed him saying. At his death, he refused to see a priest. At age 14, she decided that she didn't believe in God.
One night, I summoned God. If he really existed, to show himself to me. He didn't, and I never addressed another word to him. I loved the world, and it was suddenly God whose price was small. Literature took the place in my life occupied by religion, and it absorbed me entirely and transfigured my life. One afternoon in Paris, I realized that I was condemned to death. I was alone in the house, and I did not attempt to control my despair. I screamed and tore the red carpet.
As a young girl, Simone came to view her parents' marriage as disunity, and that her mother was imprisoned by homemaking, while her father was free. Thus she called father the transcendent one, and her mother the immanent one. She came to see self and other, marriage and love, matter and spirit, holiness and intelligence, nature and culture, man and woman, all to be complete radical contradictions.
By limiting women to tiresome, empty, monotonous household tasks, marriage mutilates and annihilates the wife. In marriage, her life is virtually finished forever. Society, being codified by man, decrees that woman is inferior. She can do away with this inferiority only by destroying male's superiority.
See, isn't it ironic that her whole thing is about marriage is the death of the woman, and that she's going to be confined to the home, and that the complementarity of men and women is viewed as a detriment, and that in a sense women have to become like men to have any sort of agency and power. And yet the one thing that women can do that men can't do is to give birth to children is viewed as a nuisance and a problem. And that this is one of the reasons why we have to have all this synthetic wombs and all these aberrant forms of sexuality and all this different stuff. And here you have the smelly old Karl Marx, notorious for not taking a bath and cheating on his wife with the maid, all that type of stuff. This guy was a moral retrobate as well.
Beauvoir embraced Karl Marx's evil dualistic conflict theory of oppressor and oppressed that would polarize our society and shape our culture of death.
In the Communist Manifesto, you see statements like this: abolition of the family, exclamation mark. Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. Wow, 1848, abolition of the family was already an infamous proposal of the communists? I mean, this is the programmatic statement, the manifesto of the Communist Party. And already then, even before the manifesto was out, this was known as an infamous proposal of the communists. And they say, one paragraph after that, the bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. And then get this, do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime, we plead guilty.
Simone's rejection of religion.
Can you imagine that? So their whole thing, they have to destroy the nuclear family so that kids aren't exploited by their parents who actually love them and care for them. But instead, in the legacy of Alfred Kinsey, make them sexually vulnerable or being able to provide consent as like 8-year-old kids to sex. This is not an attack on children, but a protecting of them. The irony, right? The irony is that they have to destroy the nuclear family so that they can basically wrestle your children away from you and violate them.
Led her to study and teach philosophy and to write her first novels. De Beauvoir chose as the epitaph of her first novel the words of Karl Marx's master, Friedrich Hegel. Each consciousness pursues the death of the other. Since the other, for de Beauvoir, would be motherhood in Western civilization. Birth control and abortion would become for her the sacraments of her lifestyle. Simone met Jean-Paul Sartre in 1929 at the Sorbonne in Paris.
I always love seeing photos of Sartre, just because that lazy eye he had, that wandering right eye. Every photo I've seen of this man is hilarious.
And soon after, moved in with him. His relationship became the greatest influence on her life and work. Sartre was a philosopher, playwright, novelist, and political activist. His novel, Nausea, is in some ways the modern manifesto of atheistic existentialism, one without a god and no human nature, except the one which she alone would design. Sartre is called the philosopher of the 20th century, fitting for the death of God century. that would shape the greatest genocidal holocaust in the history of the world.
Existentialism is nothing else than an attempt to draw all the consequences of a coherent atheistic position. Man is nothing else than what he makes of himself. To choose to be this or that is to affirm at the same time the value of what we choose, because we can never choose evil. Without God, all things are permissible.
And this really is, if you have to give Sartre any credit, existentialism really is the most coherent atheistic position, because it basically accounts that there are no objective moral truths and that everything is permissible. And so, at least for Sartre, even though again these people are degenerates, he is attempting to be consistent with his presuppositional foundation.
Key to de Beauvoir's life and influence was that she would agree with what Sartre's book, Being and Nothingness, demonstrated. That
essence does not precede existence. In pure subjectivity, the human being is not anything. He is measured by his acts.
Dr. Paul Vitz is Professor Emeritus of Psychology at New York University and Senior Scholar and Professor of the Institute for Psychological Sciences at Divine Mercy University in Arlington, Virginia. His work focused...
Yeah, I did see that. And at the end, there's an Orthodox cross also in this documentary where a man is coming to God and he bows before an Orthodox cross. Very interesting. Although, again, this is a Catholic documentary and it is very much pro-Catholic, but it is also very honest in its critique of the Catholic Church as well.
Focuses primarily on the relationship between modern psychology and Christianity. The author of many books, his work, Sigmund Freud's Christian Unconscious, offers the historical and biographical evidence for Freud's deep, lifelong rejection of Catholicism. His latest book, Faith of the Fatherless, The Psychology of Atheism, focuses on the importance of fatherhood. His current research is centered on the complementarity of the sexes.
Sartre said that essence did not precede existence. And what he wanted to get rid of was that there were essential qualities that were essentially bound up in the nature of a thing's existence. And so he said that existence comes before or precedes essence. And therefore, your existence comes before who you are or what your essence is.
Sartre was an apologist for tyranny and terror. He was a supporter of Stalin, Mao, and Castro. Sartre's ideas inspired the Khmer Rouge leadership and the events in Cambodia in the 1970s, in which between 1/5 and 1/3 of the nation was starved to death or murdered. This was the work of a group of intellectuals who were, for the most part, pupils and admirers of Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre called for violence and death in his preface to Frantz Fanon's book, The Wretched of the Earth, endorsing his devotees' neo-colonial Marxism that would later devastate Africa. Robert Riley is a writer and senior fellow at the American Policy Council in Washington and director of the Westminster Institute in McLean, Virginia. Under the Reagan administration, he served as senior advisor for public diplomacy at the U.S. Embassy in Switzerland, and later in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He is the author of many books, including Making Gay Okay: How Rationalizing Homosexual Behavior is Changing Everything.
Simone de Beauvoir's paramour, Jean-Paul Sartre, gave the philosophical principle behind this that eventually devolved into the transgender self-mutilation. And that is that existence precedes essence. Now, one would have to have studied a little metaphysics to understand the consequences of such a statement. Existence precedes essence means that you somehow exist without a nature. You're not anything really, which leaves you in a very precarious situation, and thus the the angst of existentialism. So how do you become something if you have existence but no essence? Well, you have to obtain an essence through your own will. So what becomes paramount is will rather than reason. Reason was there to apprehend the nature of reality, but if existence precedes essence, there is no nature of reality, and will becomes paramount. And this, of course, is the key of the 20th century ideologies, totalitarian ideologies, which for Hitler was triumph of the will on a race-based theory of man, or the communist class-based theory of man, both of them based on the primacy of will as against reason. So what we're seeing today in the transgender and the whole LGBT agenda is...
and again, part of the reason why they privilege will over reason, as I highlighted before with Kant's critique and then the questioning of knowability of the external world, is that these philosophical projects have said, well, let's just do away with reason being the sole instrument for man's modality towards knowledge in the world, and let's just make it the will. Let's make it based in phenomenology and the exercising of man's power of will in the face of a existence preceding essence reality.
Downstream from Sartre and de Beauvoir, just living out the full implications of what it means if you exist before you have an essence.
De Beauvoir lived with Sartre, breaking with moral traditions. They never married, seeking a freedom outside monogamy. Their so-called open relationship gave them license to form all kinds of sexual relationships with others, both men and women.
I blamed us. Myself as much as you, actually. In the past, in the future, in the absolute, the way we treat people. I felt it was unacceptable.
In his diaries, Sartre wrote that he enjoyed being a scholarly Don Juan, slaying women through the power of my golden tongue. Nothing struck me as more moving than the moment at which the avowal of love is finally wrenched forth. After that would happen, he rarely knew what to do with his conquests.
In itself, homosexuality is as limiting as heterosexuality. The idea should be to be capable of loving a woman or a man, either a human being, without feeling fear, restraint, or obligation. I am too intelligent, too demanding, and too resourceful for anyone to take charge of me entirely. No one knows me or loves me completely. I have only myself.
Simone never had children. She kept a kind of bond with Sartre as long as he lived. The philosopher Merleau-Ponty turned on its head the classical view of the human person, with a hierarchy, a primacy to God over soul and its faculties of memory, intellect, and will over the body. Merleau-Ponty eliminated God and gave primacy to the body and feelings, to what he termed embodiment and the flesh of the world, giving elite academic credence to the dumbing down of culture.
The body is our anchorage in the world. I am not in front of my body, I am in it, or rather I am it. If we can still speak of interpretation in relation to the perception of one's own body, we shall have to say that it interprets itself. We know not through our intellect, but through our experience.
The outbreak of World War II in 1939 and the German occupation of France in 1940 also contributed to her philosophical perspective.
Robots over France are direct targets for our gunners. New weapons of war add to the increasing thrills recorded by intrepid cameramen.
From 1943 to 1944, during the Nazi occupation of France, de Beauvoir, without coercion and with other options, chose freely to work for Radio Vichy, the communications pawn in France for the National Socialist Party. Dr. Ingrid Galster, an expert on Simone de Beauvoir, termed her job as a sound director in the Nazi propaganda machine to be at the very least subtle collaboration. The Telegraph also reported that the the reason she couldn't keep her teaching job was her procuring for Jean-Paul Sartre's pedophilia addiction. In 1943, Simone de Beauvoir was fired for her behavior leading to the corruption of a minor.
Absurdity challenges every ethics, but also the finished rationalization of the real would leave no room for ethics. It is because man's condition is ambiguous that he seeks through failure and outrageousness to save his existence. I feel something inside of me which scares me, an exhausting violence. But I accept the great adventure of being me.
After the war, through Les Temps Modernes, the monthly journal founded by she and Sartre in 1945, they attempted to create a cultural Marxist socialism, one less dependent on the brutal, bloody forms of World War II.
Equality between men and women will be possible when a socialist society is realized worldwide. When there would no longer be men and women, but only workers, equal with one another. Formerly, I thought that the class struggle had to happen before the struggle between the sexes. Now, I find it necessary to lead them both together. The fact is that men encounter more complicity in their women companions than the oppressor usually finds in the oppressed. And in bad faith, they use it as a pretext to declare that a woman wanted the destiny that a man imposed on her.
De Beauvoir's The Second Sex was published in 1949. It called for the moral revolution of existentialism, which reverses the principle that essence precedes existence.
One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. No biological, psychological, or economic fate determines the figure that the human female presents in society. It is civilization as a whole that produces this creature, intermediate between male and eunuch, which is described as feminine.
In her book, she explains how women's liberation is intimately related to the fate of socialism.
As socialism, true socialism, establishes economic equality among all peoples, the feminist movement learned it had to establish equality between the sexes by taking power away from the ruling class within the movement, that is, from men. Put another way, once inside the class struggle, women understood the class struggle does not eliminate the sex struggle.
While she was writing Second Sex, de Beauvoir was editing the Marxist journal Modern Times. Throughout her life, she and Sartre exhibited their support for communism, especially for the Frankfurt School's critical theory, its sexual revolution, and multiculturalism. They traveled together to visit Stalinist Russia, Maoist China, and Castro's Cuba. The Second Sex initiated the anti-creation movement to undermine the dignity of life, nature, and human nature. Life becomes dominated by the will to power. Thus, we see the emergence of what the popes have called the dictatorship of relativism and ideological colonization. Ryan T. Anderson is the William E. Simon Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. Ryan's latest book, When Harry Becomes Sally, Responding to the Transgender Moment, attempts to give what the National Review calls a measured perspective of the current gender crisis.
You know, I quote one activist in the book saying that biological sex is a social construct. The way that this originally came up was that they said gender is a social construct. Sex is merely a biological fact. So originally they were going to say, look, sex, whether you're XX or XY, whether you have male genitalia or female genitalia, that's merely biology, but that's different than gender, which is a social construct. Now they're saying everything is a social construct, even biological sex. And so they're saying that gender identity determines someone's sex. Sex is merely assigned at birth, but it could be misassigned. So later in life, you can have sex reassignment, surgery, hormones, and all of the rest. It's a vision of reality that says there are no truths baked into reality. There are no truths about human nature. There's no truth about nature writ large. That's very different than the American founding, right, which said that there are certain laws of nature and nature's God, that saw faith and reason going together, that saw philosophy and theology, science, and the Bible forming a coherent whole, revealing truths to us, not merely will to power from a certain Nietzschean perspective, not merely social construction. that there are actually truths embedded in reality that we could discover and that we could then live in accordance with. That's a very different vision than saying we just construct reality according to our own desires.
In 1977, de Beauvoir, accompanied by a large contingent of Marxist French intelligentsia, signed a petition which demanded the legalization of pedophilia. It required the immediate release of 3 individuals due to serve long jail sentences for sexually abusing boys and girls aged 11 to 14. De Beauvoir and Sartre signed the petition. Published in the newspaper Le Monde, their petition said this of pedophilia: a simple vice affair where the children have not been victims of the slightest violence, who consented, although the law at present denies them their right to consent, who today risk to be sentenced to a long prison term, either for having had sexual relations with minors, boys as well as girls, or for having encouraged and taken photographs of their sexual plays. The designation as a crime, which serves to legitimatize such a severity, and the facts themselves. Even more so, the antiquated law and the reality of everyday life in a society which claims to know about the sexuality of children and adolescents.
So you see exactly what I articulated at the beginning of the stream with the Marxist framing of oppressor versus oppressed and the existentialism viewing any sort of cultural containment on sexual norms is viewed as constraining one's liberty, one's freedom, one's self-expression. And therefore, the petition says, children aren't victims of pedos. They willingly consent. They enjoy the sexual plays. It's the problem is the antiquated law, which makes people think it's wrong. Therefore, because again, there is no God, there is no objective moral, we just need to change these antiquated laws and then nobody's going to have a problem with it.
The great Simone, she was really something. She and Jean-Paul Sartre in this little world, this little coven they created on the left bank in Paris.
Mallory Millett is a former left-wing radical and Hollywood actress. Today, she is a practicing Catholic and a director of the David Horowitz Freedom Center.
We'll see you there.
She is the sister of Kate Millett, the American feminist and co-founder of NOW, the National Organization for Women. Mallory's sister Kate has been described by the New York Times as a seminal influence on second-wave feminism. She is best known for her book, Sexual Politics, published in 1970.
It was her Columbia University PhD thesis. And I was living with her and her Japanese husband in their loft on the Bowery. And we'd get up and have breakfast every morning, and she'd be working on her book, and she'd read me passages from her book. And we were all very excited about this. In fact, I titled the book. I was the one who came up with the title Sexual Politics. And it was immediately an instant hit. They put her on the cover of Time magazine. They called her the Mao Zedong of the women's movement. And of course, when my sister became famous, she got to know Simone de Beauvoir. She made a point of that because she worshiped Simone de Beauvoir. I mean, they became very, very good friends. And my sister would fly over to France all the time. Kate Millett and her Simone de Beauvoir and all of her pals, they would sit in their salons in Paris and have their little pipe dreams, their little utopian fantasies.
In my opinion, so long as the family and the myth of the family and the myth of maternity and the maternal instinct are not destroyed, women will still be oppressed. No, we don't believe that any woman should have that choice. No woman should be authorized to stay at home to raise her children. Society should be totally different. No woman should be allowed this choice precisely because if there is such a choice, too many women will make it one.
So to liberate women, she says she wants to eradicate the maternal instinct in women, because if women had an option to stay home with their children while their husbands worked, too many women would choose that, and therefore that shouldn't be an option. And this is all in the name of feminism to advance the rights of women and protect women. Huh?
Dr. Alice von Hildebrand is a renowned lecturer, author, television host, and retired professor of Hunter College. Her late husband, Dietrich von Hildebrand, is one of the most celebrated philosopher theologians of...
I love that. Right Tax says, your free will is lying to you. Allow me. In the name of existential freedom, let me limit your choices because you'll make the wrong one.
Our modern age. Her published works include The Soul of a Lion, a biography of her husband, and The Privilege of Being a Woman, the reflections of a true feminist.
The wolf is hidden in clothing, the liberation of women. And this liberation is nothing but slavery, because they give up their gift, this extraordinary gift of the collaboration between God and life, which is precisely what eternity is. The attack on femininity, the vicious attack on the beauty of motherhood. Let us go back to Genesis, when God created a man and a woman, which are superbly complementary. They're different, but their difference is enriching for one another, because it wasn't good for man to be alone. Man is made for communion, and communion means love, and love means self-giving. It is said Adam sees Eve, and he's enchanted, blood of my blood and flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone. And then he gives her a superb title, a title that should make every single little girl conscious of the fact that she's a little girl. Thank God. She's called the mother of the living, establishing a bond between woman and life, which is dictated by God himself. The serpent turned to Eve because was she the weaker one, and therefore easier to conquer and to defeat. Being infinitely clever, and much more clever than we are, he knew perfectly well that Eve had an immense influence on Adam. And as soon as she was conquered, he would follow suit, which is exactly what happened. Because she lives in the apple, he doesn't say, "My dear wife, what do you mean? We're not permitted to eat it." He eats it. And then afterwards, a real coward, when God made reproaches to him, he said, "The wife that you gave him." Therefore, the devil attacks Eve because she's a mother of the living. And he was a murderer from the beginning. No, therefore, there is a war between Eve and the devil, between life and death. And we have got to realize that what is happening today is a war on the beauty and greatness and femininity.
You know, and I see the people in the chat saying W to the old lady, Grandma Wisdom. Absolutely. And she makes, and I think it's part 2 or part 3, she makes another phenomenal point, because she's arguing that women have the gift of life bestowed on them by God to give birth to life. And this is the point of sexuality. And this is why sex is a pleasure and it's supposed to be performed in the right context. And we look at the contemporary state of Western civilization, and though there's a lot of blame to be placed on the sexual promiscuity and the sexualization done by women in the name of promoting women, that it's also, the devil does attack women. As she said, they are a more vulnerable of the two. And we look at the transgender agenda is putting men in competition with women. It's actually harming women, but it's the women that are putting it forth. And so I recently read an article about how many women in college sports actually they're progressive. So they're in favor of a lot of this stuff, yet they don't want to compete against men, yet they're too scared to speak out against it because of the social consensus of their peers. So women are, again, and this is why there's been studies on propaganda and all this different stuff, and why women are more susceptible, because they kind of defer to the consensus of the herd rather than, their own rational capability. Not that women aren't rational, not that women can't be smart or think for themselves. Of course they can, but generally speaking, and this has been documented in more academic scientific studies. And so we look at our society, and it's really the women that are being affected the most. Now, of course, the men are as well. We know this. We've talked about this. I've done thousands of streams on it, but it's the women that are falling for the lie, not having families, giving away the precious gift of their sexuality, getting into their late 30s and 40s, becoming single, not having a family, and just being an old hag. The whole archetype of the old hag, the childless lady that lives by herself, surrounded by cats, the sort of witch archetype. This is what the devil is selling women. And it really does go all the way back to Eve. It's the same lie that women think that they're going to become their own goddess, that they're going to liberate themselves, and all they've done is enslave themselves. And all these videos that are now on social media of these young girls that are in their mid-20s and they go get their college degree and they get their minimum wage job in whatever field they think they wanted to work in, and now they're under fluorescent lights, 9 to 5, having to accommodate to the wills of their boss. And yet they're saying, all I want to do is I want to bake. I want to be around children. I want to be at home. But now you've already screwed the pooch. You got a mortgage, or you got your apartment rent, you got bills to pay. And now you're on the hamster wheel that the devil has constructed, so that women have actually given away their safety and their maternal agency for what? To put photos on social media, to have as much sex as they want while they're still young and supple, and then all of a sudden that goes away too. I mean, in a way, and this is what Father Turbo made the point, that he believes that the chaos, the demonic chaos of our society is really affecting women the most, even though in the immediate moment the women don't notice it. So it's like the men notice it immediately. They're trying to find a wife, they're trying to build a family, they're getting cheated on by their girlfriend, all this different stuff. It's so hard to meet somebody, and the women don't notice it in the immediate moment. But the women are actually affected the most because they've given up everything by the end of their life, really by menopause, and they don't have anything to show for it. Well, a man, through God's providence, as long as he's faithful, God will bless him with the right one, but he has to persevere. He has to suffer in the immediate moment to get a reward later, God willing, where the women get all the pleasure in the immediate moment and they're going to suffer big time later.
In 1983, the Catholic Church placed Simone de Beauvoir's Second Sex on the index of prohibited books. The announcement was made in Osservatore Romano in an article entitled Immoral Existentialism. 3 years later, Simone died of pneumonia in Paris at age 78. She was buried next to Sartre at the Montparnasse Cemetery in Paris.
She claims that she was not born a woman. She claims she became a woman. Well, what that means is that when she was born, she had existence, but no essence. And the essence that she ended up having, she was given by the culture. And it's not a real essence, therefore. It was something given to her. She hadn't freely chosen it. And therefore, she could now freely choose whatever her essence might be. And so therefore, she was going to choose to be more like, if, pardon the interpretation, she would choose to be more like the first sex.
She kind of gives me Maria Abramovich vibes in this photo. Don't you guys? Like, I feel like you could almost move Simone de Beauvoir and put Marina Abramovich in here, and the face looks eerily similar.
Alfred Charles Kinsey was born the oldest of 3 children, June 23, 1894, in Hoboken, New Jersey. His parents, Alfred Sr. and Sarah, were strict Methodists and of modest means. Alfred Jr. was a sickly child. After high school, he was forced by his father to study engineering at his old college, the Stevens Institute of Technology. But Kinsey chose to continue his education in applied biology at Harvard. There he chose Professor William Morton Wheeler to be his mentor. Kinsey would soon imitate his mentor by becoming an agnostic and a Darwinian evolutionist. In 1919,
my wife and I
Kinsey graduated and went to teach at Indiana University. At a picnic, he met Clara Bracken McMiller, a chemistry student. They married in 1924 and had 4
Yeah, FDA makes a great point. It is sad to see, like, Alfred Kinsey as a little boy, again, and he had loving parents. Again, he literally gets indoctrinated through Harvard into this Darwinian theory of empirical study of sex and all that, and basically is given a license to project and to research his own sexual degeneracy and fantasies. And what they're getting ready to make a point here in the documentary is that his marriage with his wife was more like a beard, masking his own homosexuality and pedophilic desires.
4 children. Kinsey was bisexual. He himself had sex with other men. He and his wife agreed that each could have sex with other people as well as with each other.
Well, Neocon Aricus says, I'm from Indiana. Me too, fellow Hoosier. Why do we produce such wacky people? Well, he's not from our state. He's not from Indiana. He's from Hoboken, New Jersey. And he just was given a tenured teaching position at IU through the funding of the Rockefeller Foundation for this type of stuff. But it is disgusting and tragic.
Each other. Dr. Judith Reisman is an eminent professor, author, and the leading expert on Alfred Kinsey. She has served as associate professor at the University of Haifa in Israel and full professor at American University in Washington, D.C. She is currently director of the Institute for Media Education and director of the Child Protection Center at Liberty University School of Law. Dr. Reisman's unique research caused a re-examination of the very basis of Kinsey's work. It demonstrated his direct influence on America's sexual revolution. Some of Dr. Reisman's notable books include Kinsey, Crime and Consequences, and Kinsey, Sex and Fraud, The Indoctrination of a People. Dr. Reisman's studies show how Kinsey and his work sought to normalize in society his own personal deviant sexual habits.
When they married, immediately, he was involved in the sex research right away. And what a guy like that is called now, who marries, she was his beard, is what the homosexual movement refers to, marrying somebody in order to maintain your position in society. And it would have been an absolute ruin for him if he would have been known to be homosexual.
By 1929, Kinsey had studied eugenics at the Bussey Institution. This led him to develop a deep relationship with Dr. Herman Joseph Muller, a radical socialist and a colleague at Indiana University. Muller would receive a Rockefeller Foundation grant in 1932. It was for further study of eugenics at the Kaiser Wilhelm Brain Research Center in Berlin. In 1938, Kinsey suddenly chose to leave entomology and to teach a radically liberal course on marriage, family, and sexuality, dressed all the while in conservative suits and bow ties.
So he was teaching this course, and that gave him the excuse to say he was going to be collecting data. He was asking all kinds of very personal questions. He wanted to take their histories, their sexual histories, right? And he would ask the girls to measure their body parts because he claimed there was no data. Well, that was not true at all. There was plenty of data, plenty of reports out there. They weren't the kind that he wanted. So he made that claim. It was picked up.
Imagine that you go to class and your girlfriend goes to Alfred Kinsey's classroom. You're like, oh, what'd you guys study today? Oh, well, he had all the girls. We had to measure our breasts, our butts, every sexual feature on us, and then give it to him to categorize for his science. Huh. Oh, all right.
And supported by the Rockefeller Foundation. So in order to understand what people were doing, we have to have a new science. The science would be the science of sexology, which did not exist. There was nothing like that.
Immediately, in the spirit of Sigmund Freud, he railed against the repression of sexual desires. He rejected the unity of science and religion, and thus of nature and nature's God. As a result, he rejected the reality of the two sexes being one flesh, made complementary, and thus the important science of male-female complementarity, that a woman is an XX chromosome karyotype and a man is an XY chromosome karyotype.
If all persons with any trace of homosexual history, or those who are predominantly homosexual, were eliminated from the population today, there is no reason for believing that the incidence of the homosexual in the next generation would be materially reduced. The homosexual has been a significant part of human sexual activity since the dawn of history, primarily because it is an expression of capacities that are basic in the human animal.
Yeah, well, so is murder. That's been with us since the dawn of the fall, and those are basic to the capacities of human agency. So what? That doesn't make murder correct, but that's the logic this guy takes to normalize pedos.
Kinsey's courses became immediately popular among the students. Soon after, Kinsey founded his Institute for Sex Research at Indiana University, with grants from the Rockefeller Foundation and the National Research Council.
Why did the Rockefeller Foundation fund him? It's because he was a nobody. He comes to them and he says, I'm interested in the same things you're interested in. And so they funded everything through this alleged interest in prostitution and VD.
Dr. Kinsey's team forced subjects to give the desired answers to their sex questions.
His team, good-looking young men, no women, no Jews, no blacks, no Catholics, nobody with any kind of religious, he had terrible animus against Catholicism.
We are the recorders and reporters of facts, not the judges of the behaviors we describe. The only kinds of sexual dysfunctions are abstinence, celibacy, and delay of marriage.
So where did all these results come from?
They secretly trashed 3/4 of their research data.
Did you notice that? The three forms of sexuality that he thought were repressive was abstinence, chastity, and waiting for till marriage. all the virtues of our sexuality.
They based their claims not on a scientific sampling of normal males, but on a roughly 86% aberrant male population, one that included 200 sexual psychopaths, 1,400 sex offenders, and hundreds each of prisoners, male prostitutes, and promiscuous homosexuals.
And he said the prison population represents the public more than the middle-class student would.
Absolutely, saved by grace. They commented and said the agenda is to normalize making your kids think homosexuality is normal because they can't control their own sexual urges as God has told them to. Absolutely. That's absolutely it.
And women, oh my goodness. He called women who were living with a man for more than a year, the average married woman. A woman who lives with a man for more than a year. Suddenly she's a married woman? That was his definition of a married woman. What woman, any woman, but certainly a married woman, would talk to a guy behind closed doors and tell him all about their sex lives, you know? So he made up what he wanted to make up. He made up anything that justified what he wanted to teach the American public was normal, was average, was without consequence, because he said no consequences to multiple partners.
Did you see what she was saying there? Is that for the category of married woman in his research, obviously the average married woman would not want to go to Alfred Kinsey's laboratory in a private room with him and him ask all the personal questions of her sex life with her husband and her maybe past or whatnot. So he then redefined what a married woman was, that as long as they lived with a man, could have been a boyfriend, could have been an apartment roommate, for a year, then they were considered married. And then he could ask these young single girls what their sexual activities were like to broaden the spectrum to, again, create the normalization of these sexual proclivities and activities.
No consequences to bestiality, no consequences to any of these things. Do what thou wilt.
Kinsey's fake science and child abuse, how he solicited and encouraged pedophiles, and how they sexually violated from 317 to 2,035 infants and children in order to obtain his alleged data that normalized child sexuality.
Did you guys hear that? Did you hear that? Let me play that again real quick.
How he solicited and encouraged pedophiles, and how they sexually violated from 317 to 2,035 infants and children.
He allowed, in the name of science, backed by the Rockefeller Foundation, allowed and documented for the sake of science the molestation of infants and young children, most likely above 2,000 children.
In order to obtain his alleged data that normalized child sexuality.
Love is the answer, isn't it? But sex raises a lot of very interesting questions. There is a tendency to consider anything in human behavior that is unusual, not well known, or not well understood as neurotic, psychopathic, immature, perverse, or the expression of some sort of psychologic disturbance. Everybody's sin is nobody's sin, and everybody's crime is no crime at all.
Esther White was one of the subjects of Kinsey's fake science. She has suffered profoundly from being tragically molested as a child. The data that came from those horrific crimes committed against Esther was used in Table 34.
I lived in a little bitty town.
Table 34, again, referencing the beginning of the stream when I showed you guys my notes on Kinsey, on the document that's up for $5 a month members. Please go sign up. I talked about Table 34 and the sexuality of the male or something like that. I forget the exact title of the book. It's going to come up here. It was his major, it's his biggest bestseller, 1948. And Table 34 is him documenting the orgasm rate, how long it takes, beginning at 5 months old. This woman here, this old woman recanting, her father was being paid by Alfred Kinsey to molest her and then tell him the details about it. And then they came, and she had no idea as a little girl, and she's going to talk about it, came and asked her questions about these activities, which her mother did not know about because her father told her to never tell your mother about this. Mommy and daddy will get a divorce. And so she never told her mother. Alfred Kinsey comes and asks her questions about it for Table 34, for this document, for proof of his research.
Down in Ohio, I had a little baby brother and a mother and father. I was a normal kid, except my life was different. It was like living two lives at the same time. It started at Indiana University. My grandfather went there to get his teaching certificates, and Alfred Kinsey was there at the same time, getting everybody in the school involved in his new project. Then my granddad took this teaching with him. So this was spread to the schools we taught at. Then my grandfather taught my father, and my uncle was right along with him. And he got the forms to fill out on all the things that they wanted to know. There was an underworld kind of thing going on that was a very secret world that I was to keep secret from my mother. Don't tell mommy, you'll cause a divorce. When my father came to me and wanted me to do things that he said were secret, I kept them secret. I didn't understand sexuality even at that time. I knew real love. That's not love. My dad used a stopwatch, and he made home movies.
Which I'm sure Alfred Kinsey watched. The reason why her dad was using a stopwatch was to give the information to Kinsey for his book.
The world is not to be divided into sheep and goats. And not all things are black, nor all things white. The only unnatural act is that which you cannot perform.
Alfred Kinsey wanted to interview me. And so he came to my grandfather's house. This was probably in 1944. And I was born in 34, so that makes me 10 years old at the time. He was a big man. And he had two other big men with him. And one man had a clipboard, and he was taking down answers to my questions, and I was to answer them. I don't remember all the questions now. But one of them is, do you love your daddy? And I answered yes. So before the men were ready to leave, my grandfather says to Alfred Kinsey, oh, what about the check? And he says, oh, I almost forgot. So he gets out this check for, I think, $6,000.
$6,000 in 1944. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And you know that Kinsey was using her answer that she loved her daddy as his argument that children can consent to this stuff.
In 1947, my dad gave me the pre-published copy of Alfred Kinsey's first book, and he wanted me to give a report to him, a couple of paragraphs on what I thought about the book. Well, when I saw the charts in there, I knew that that was what was going on.
I looked at table 34 in chapter 5. And children as young as 5 months of age in that table were being masturbated, raped. 24 hours around the clock, they were being used. What were they doing to that child? What were they doing? And he says, group number 3, weeping hysterically, especially among the younger children. Children fighting the partner. Partner? This is a man who is raping the child. Fighting the partner to get away. To get away. That is what he called an orgasm.
My dad told me that he had worked with an author, and that the result of that, Alfred Kinsey would change the way the world recognized sexuality.
This was a strategy to normalize sexual deviance, to normalize his own sexual deviance and the sexual deviance of his comrades. Absolutely. This was a strategy, and it has been used since then to today. To today. The claim that children are sexual from birth.
Children are not sexual from birth. I can testify to that.
That is the strategy used to justify teaching kindergartners about sex, about sodomy, every kind of sodomy, calling it just another form of sex, to teach them about the gay, lesbian, and bisexual, and transgender, and undecided groups. And we don't want them to feel bad because we know that they are children. Since they're children, we know that they are sexual also from birth. So we've got to teach all of our children how to do all of these sexual things and reshape every little brain we possibly can.
No one ever thought about the fact that people would molest children and call it science. I'm sure many of those children, hundreds of children, probably committed suicide.
I know it's hard to listen to, guys. Lord have mercy, and just keep all. You could say a prayer for all the victims tonight, but it does get easier after this. This is kind of the most difficult part to swallow.
That's profound. But looking back in time, that what I was put through was evil. The worst evil. I am so blessed to even be here. I have to forgive my dad because he was deceived by Kinsey.
Kinsey does sexual behavior in the human male. It gets a massive communications blitz across the nation. Everybody is hearing about it. Kinsey's telling us the truth about ourselves.
All of this was done with the complicit support of America's mainline media. Life Look and Time magazines promoted Kinsey's bold sex findings as heroic scientific truth.
Hugh Hefner, like most guys at that time, were virgins. They were saving themselves for their love, for their beloved, for when they were married, and he believed that. And when he was in college, he read Kinsey's book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. And he said, if Kinsey was the scientist, I will be his pamphleteer. And he was. He became his pamphleteer.
The American Statistical Association, in rejecting Kinsey's science, stated, critics are justified in their objections that many of the most interesting and provocative statements in the book are not based on the data presented therein, and it is not made clear to the reader on what evidence the statements are based. Further, the conclusions drawn from the data presented in the book are often stated in much too bold and confident a manner. Taken together, these objections amount to saying that much of the writing in the book falls below the level of good scientific writing. The noted statistician John Tukey condemned the sampling procedure, stating that a random selection of 3 people would have been better than the group of 300 chosen by Mr. Kinsey.
The head of the American Statistical Association sent a bunch of guys, Turkey and 3 guys, to the Kinsey Institute to talk to them about their data. First of all, Kinsey lied, and he said he had a statistician. He never had a statistician.
Kinsey published Sexual Behavior in the Human Female in 1953. Though it didn't sell as well as his first book, it still became a bestseller.
Before Kinsey, you had 3 possibilities of law. One was natural law, biblical law by our experience, and then common law. And suddenly that would be replaced by scientific data, science law. What has been proven by science becomes our determination for what will be acceptable in a courtroom.
The Kinsey Institute's fake science and the American Law Institute's model penal code were both funded and quietly implemented by the Rockefeller Foundation, and would be funded further and quietly implemented throughout the world by another Rockefeller-funded project, the United Nations.
The causal effect of Kinsey's fraudulent criminal data. In 1955, the American law...
Somebody asked when this documentary was made. I don't know the exact date, but I do know it was after 2020, because in part 3, and we may skip it, they talk about the pandemic and the COOF, and talking about how this is inaugurating people into this sort of state of chaos and abiding by the procedures that are administered by the state, who is operating in place of God due to the undermining of Christian values and civilization. So it is definitely after 2020, but I don't know the exact date, and I didn't find it on YouTube. This is a third party. This is somebody, Kenneth Ray Passard, posted on his YouTube channel. He doesn't look like he has a real YouTube channel. It's 550 subscribers, but that's how I found this. Again, shout out to Father Deacon Dr. Ananias, who brought it to my attention and said, hey, have you checked this out? This is a great Catholic documentary. So we're going to go a little bit further here, guys. We're probably about halfway, a little bit past halfway through it. So smash that like. And again, if you want to support my work, my YouTube channel, please send in a super chat, be it on Streamlabs, Dono Chat, or here on YouTube. And if you are feeling generous, please give some COTEL Crew memberships. I hope this stays up. As I said, I wouldn't be surprised if it gets flagged. I hope not. God, please don't let that happen, but your will be done. So just FYI, if you don't see it on the YouTube channel, it may be because of the topics that we got into today. But anyways, thank you guys for being here. Smash that like. And if you'd like to support, please do so.
Law Institute Model Penal Code is produced. It goes throughout the country. It's sent to every state, to all the legislators. And what that would do would eliminate what we had known to be as common law. As a result, it would eliminate much sex offense laws and allow for the parole of sex criminals. And you just give them a little therapy and give them another chance. So fornication and cohabitation would be the first laws that went the way of the dodo bird. But what it did in the long run, eventually, was to weaken or eliminate all of our laws on adultery. Seduction went out the window. Prostitution, solicitation, tremendously weakened. Sodomy and bestiality, normal, harmless, weakened. Obscenity, exhibitionism, alienation of affection, breach of promise, those start to fall. Abortion, and from there, partial birth abortion. Euthanasia, cloning, fetal harvesting, all these things would suddenly require you to go into the court and say, I was physically harmed. There was real damage.
Just when you think you've gotten to their goalpost, you say, okay, so now you have marriage between one man and one woman. You good now? 20 years later, they change it again. They move it. So wait a second, I thought you supported the Defense of Marriage Act. Now the goalpost isn't there, it's here. Well, that's right, we've evolved, we've changed. So they're always moving it all the time. They're constantly changing. And it's maddening, that's very frustrating. What is the end game?
So Playboy funded SECUS, Sex Education Council of the United States, and Mary Calderon, who ran SECUS, who had been the medical educator for Planned Parenthood. So SECUS was formed at the Kinsey Institute with the idea that they would be in charge of sex education and teach in the schools. That formed the foundation for sexology, for the training of sexologists, for the training of sex therapists. How can you be teaching that based on the lies created by a sexual psychopath, a pederast, and identify that as a field of legitimate research, of legitimate influence? And they influence everything.
During the last 6 months of Kinsey's life, his health steadily declined as he gradually developed congestive heart failure. Then one day, walking in his garden, he tripped and fell, injuring his leg. The bruise developed into a deadly embolism. On August 25th, 1956, Kinsey died at the hospital in Bloomington, Indiana. He was 62 years old. The Kinsey Institute steadfastly refuses to reveal Kinsey's sources and study methods. This in and of itself renders his scientific research utterly meaningless because it cannot be checked by examination and replication. Because the primary principle of scientific research is that it is useless without verification or replication.
All of
the absolute scourge of the state of Indiana, and Indiana University should be ashamed for their Kinsey Institute.
this moves to loosen our protective mechanisms for the mother and the child and for the family. And therefore, destroying protection for the mother, the child, the family destroys the civilization.
The mind is a very, very tricky and delicate thing and not to be messed with. So mine got messed with. And like many people who identify as a transgender person,
Okay, we're going to skip this guy. And so basically the story of this man here is he, at a young age, I think he was 5 years old, and he wasn't able to, I think he was kind of a small child. Anyways, his parents left him with his grandmother while they went camping, and his grandmother allowed him to wear, she was a seamstress and had her own business, a purple dress. Here, right here, you kind of can see it. A purple dress that she made just for him. And he talks about how special he felt during this experience, that his grandmother sort of validated who he was and validated him in a way very different than like his father does, as when he's with the boys or his friends. And that after this experience, his father finds the dress. He eventually takes it home. It's a little secret between him and his grandmother. And his dad's furious, takes it from him. And there's like this whole fallout. Obviously, he's a little kid, so he then grows up with the family. But he said after this experience, he always felt like he was most validated and most loved by his grandmother when he wore the purple dress. So he ends up getting like sex change surgery in his 80s, or I mean, in the 80s, when he was like late 40s or something, and he was married, and he hid all this stuff. And then he eventually confronted his wife about it. Sounds like she was a great woman. They tried to go to counseling. They were trying to work through it. And then eventually they got divorced, and he wanted to pursue then his new identity as a woman. He got surgeries to do all this stuff fully in the 80s. And he was like I said, in his late 40s. And then he lived like a professional life and was fairly successful as this trans woman. And now he's a prominent speaker who promotes Christianity, who has detransitioned and is warning about the problems of the trans agenda and how this doesn't make you happy, and has now like found like why he felt that way based on this experience as a child, and is now a man, a heterosexual man who writes books and I think travels and gives speeches of warning about transgenderism and stuff. So that's pretty much that. So I'm going to end it. I'm going to start it right towards the end of that whole story. So you guys, that's like 10 minutes here. So now this is towards the end of it. So you may be informed a little bit of what is being referenced or anything like that. Picture of Christ in the flower. It's about the end of his story, detransitioning, coming back to Christianity.
If in fact we can change and destroy gender identity, if in fact that can be accomplished, then we have destroyed the foundation of the biblical family, one man, one woman. And that, I believe, is ultimately what many of the people who are promoting this ideology really want to do, is to destroy the foundation of Jesus Christ, marriage, and family.
If anyone today thinks that the imposition of this LGBT transgender ideology is any less a profound distortion of what it means to be a human being than were the Nuremberg laws in 1935, they're kidding themselves. They're kidding themselves.
Father Philip Bachansky is Executive Director of Courage and Encourage International, a Catholic apostolate that offers support for those who experience same-sex attractions and their loved ones.
In the late 1970s, Cardinal Terence Cook was Archbishop of New York and created a new office in his Archdiocesan administration, trying to address the needs of the peripheries of the church. One of the things that Cardinal Cook wanted to take particular interest in was the community of Catholics who were experiencing same-sex attractions, living in homosexual relationships, or engaged in homosexual intimate acts, and who were coming to Cardinal Cook. He was meeting them in the confessional or in his office and saying, we've been living this way, but we feel a call to do something different, to embrace what the church has to teach about chastity, but we're not sure we can do it on our own. We need help. We need the support of the church. Father Benedict Rochelle, who was assisting the Archdiocese in many ways even back then, and Father Rochelle.
And I am not promoting this organizations nor know anything about them. Okay, just FYI, this is the Catholic documentary. It gets back into the sort of the story here, so it's kind of part of it. But I'm not here promoting any of these Catholic organizations. I have no idea who some of these people are. Just FYI.
Rochelle knew an oblate priest of St. Francis de Sales called Father John Harvey. Father Harvey had studied and written for several years about moral theology, and particularly about human sexuality and the question of homosexuality, that had been giving retreats for priests who were experiencing same-sex attraction and striving to live chastely according to their promise of celibacy. So our first meeting of what would become the Courage Apostolate happened on September 26, 1980. So from that first small meeting in New York, we now have nearly 200 chapters in 15 countries. And I don't know if that first group could have envisioned where we stand today, but certainly we feel that we've inherited a great legacy from them. What every human being is called to do is to pursue the virtue of chastity. Chastity is not repression. It doesn't mean pretending that we don't have desires. Chastity is integration. It means I consider my desires in light of my identity as a child of God, in light of my vocation, and I only act on those desires that are going to get me closer to being a saint, to living as a disciple, to living a holy life.
Father Paul Sullins is Research Professor of Sociology at Catholic University of America and Senior Research Associate of the Ruth Institute. Formerly Episcopalian, Father Sullins is a married Catholic priest with 3 children.
The brain differences between a man and a woman go all the way down. It's not just that gender is somehow a social expression. The social scientists are, while they're pursuing that agenda, the hard scientists are showing us that you can take the brains of 2 persons. You can't tell whether they're black or white. You can't tell what language they speak. You can't tell a lot of social things about them. But one thing you can tell is whether it's a man or a woman, a male brain or a female brain. And those differences are profound and persistent through all of our being, all of our life.
Kinsey's work of mainstreaming homosexuality and sexual perversion has damaged the Catholic priesthood and catapulted the Church into the worst abuse crisis in its history. It has already been shown that Bella Dodd, the former American communist, confessed to her friends, Drs. Dietrich and Alice von Hildebrand, of her success in recruiting over 1,100 men to the priesthood in the 1930s. But in an exclusive interview, Alice clarified that Bella told her that these men were not just communists, but homosexuals.
The communists are very clever, and he knew perfectly well that in order to destroy Catholicism, what they destroyed was to pervert priests. And so she says that there were seminaries, I think that in Poland, who were trained to spread homosexuality among priests. And she collaborated. She was truly very, very active, precisely. And she told me about this here. And she succeeded.
The case of Mr. Theodore McCarrick demands a thorough report as to how such a man with his sexual abuse history could have risen to such positions of power in the Church. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has commissioned 2 reports by the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Those reports found that over 80% of the victims were neither girls nor prepubescent children, which is true pedophilia. They were preteen and teenage boys. These results clearly indicate that the problem was male-on-male homosexuality by priests against underage boys. The Church has a problem with male-on-male predation by priests. To set the problem in the context of society, in 2002, the Federal Department of Education completed a study of sexual abuse in America's public schools, based on its No Child Left Behind project. The study was led by Carol Shakeshaft. Interviewed after completing the study, she was asked to comment on her results in the light of the Catholic Church priest abuse problem. She said, "Yes, the Catholic Church has a problem, but the physical sex abuse of students in schools is likely more than 100 times the abuse level in the Church." In 1983, in light of the developing priest sex abuse crisis, the St. Luke Institute was founded by Father Michael Peterson, an open homosexual and psychiatrist who began treating homosexual priest abusers. In 1985, a year before dying of AIDS, Peterson developed a plan for the bishops, which recruited 2 Kinseyite doctors, John Money and Fred Berlin, who, in the words of Peterson, can bring this psychiatric disorder out of the shadows and into the scientific daylight, and see this disorder as a psychiatric disease and not a moral weakness. On March 21st, 1993, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette obtained a copy of a secret Vatican signatura which stated, St. Luke's Institute, a clinic founded by a priest who is openly homosexual and based on a mixed doctrine of Freudian pansexualism and behaviorism, is surely not a suitable institution apt to judge rightly about the beliefs and the lifestyle of a Catholic priest. The Catechism of the Catholic Church articulates its teaching on homosexuality, basing itself on sacred scripture, which presents homosexual acts as acts of grave depravity. Tradition has always declared that homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered. They are contrary to the natural law. They close the sexual act to the gift of life. They do not proceed from a genuine affective and sexual complementarity. Under no circumstances can they be approved. Pope Benedict XVI, in his last address to members of the Curia before resigning, said, "It is now becoming clear that the very notion of being, of what being human really means, is being called into question." In the famous saying of Simone de Beauvoir, "One is not born a woman, one becomes so." These words lay the foundation for what is put forward today under the term gender as a new philosophy of sexuality. The profound falsehood of this theory and of the anthropological revolution contained within it is obvious.
After Vatican II, women were convinced that to wear a veil in church is a sign of their inferiority.
I love this. So she makes another great point here about post-Vatican II does away with the tradition of women wearing veils and headscarves. And she highlights that she believes this is part of the gender agenda because the scarf and the veil is something that signifies the innate sexuality of women as opposed to men, and is actually a way for them to sort of hold on to a sort of purified and sanctified sexuality that's unique to the woman. And that the doing away with the veils is a sort of blurring that distinction and amalgamizing the male and the female together. I think that's actually a great point and is a great apologetic tool for why veiling is a good thing and more people should do it. More women should do it.
It is abandoned. That was a lie. Veiling indicated sexuality. In other words, there is something about the female body which is sacred. And therefore, what is taking place today is this vicious attack on femininity because it makes us lose a sense of the sacred. It makes us lose a sense for the bond between a woman and life. And therefore, it opened the door to abortion.
Our culture has lost almost entirely the wisdom and the common sense of the importance of fathers. It always was here in the pre-modern period. People knew this. And it wasn't always that natural fathers were good, and it wasn't always that natural fathers were present. And oftentimes fathers were off at war or off on fishing boats or whatever, or sometimes they died. But then they knew that children needed a substitute father. And when you had the small town and the extended family around, you had uncles and older brothers, you had other father figures around. But our culture has lost that. And by losing the notion of the importance of fathers, a big chunk of what it means to be a man, a big chunk of what manhood is about, has been removed.
No, the very moment that you attack femininity and you attack maternity, in this very moment you open the door for all the disasters which are taking place today.
My sister was involved in a whole group of women that were starting the National Organization for Women. This was their big dream. And they would have these weekly meetings at an apartment in Greenwich Village. And they would all sit around this big, long, oval table. And every single meeting was opened with this same mantra. And the chairwoman would ask, "Why are we here today?" "To make revolution," they answered. "What kind of revolution?" she replied. "The cultural revolution," they chanted. "And how do we make cultural revolution?" she demanded. "By destroying the American family," they resounded. "How do we destroy the family?" she came back. "By destroying the American patriarch," they cried exuberantly. "And how do we destroy the American patriarch?" she replied. "By taking away his power." "How do we do that?" "By destroying monogamy," they shouted. "And how do we destroy monogamy?" "By promoting promiscuity, eroticism, prostitution, abortion, and homosexuality," they resounded.
being Jewish and hearing, the whole World War II Holocaust thing, the Nuremberg trials, said that the people that do stuff are responsible for what they do.
Brian Kamiker is director of Mass Resistance, a leading pro-family activist organization founded in 1995 to provide information and guidance to people who confront the assaults on traditional family, school children, and the moral foundations of society.
As Pope John Paul said, we have to fearlessly tell the truth. And so what mass resistance does is sort of revolutionary within this movement. It's actually taking it seriously as a culture war, and understanding that it's a house of cards, but it's not going to go away by itself. It's going to take, a push. And it can either happen now or it can happen in 80 years, like the Soviet Union. It's up to us, but it is not permanent. It is unnatural, and it is destroying all of us.
Vladimir Lenin said, "The best revolutionary is a youth denied of morals." Whereas John Adams says, "The Constitution was created for a moral and religious people. It cannot govern any other."
They understand what earlier radical movements, such as the communist movement, understood, which is that you got to take down God. You've got to take God out of this. You have to take religion out of this, because religion gets in your way.
The eminent philosopher Eric Vogelin said, "Historically, the murder of God is not followed by the Superman, but by the murder of man. The deicide of the Gnostic theoreticians is followed by the homicide of the revolutionary practitioners." With the Chinese virus COVID-19, we've slipped into a dystopian world of social engineering. This was described by Fabian socialist Aldous Huxley as the Brave New World. Huxley's friend Aleister Crowley was also a mutual friend of Alfred Kinsey. Aldous Huxley did social engineering research at the Tavistock Institute. In the 1950s, he and Alfred Kinsey worked for the CIA's MK Ultra program. Their research focused on drug and sex-induced mind control.
So this is the dream world with which we're confronted today. It has a whole different calculus of what is good and what is evil. That's an inversion of what is truly good and what is truly evil. Everything is inverted.
They want Christian scouts. That's who they want.
He loves you so much. He died on the cross for you. Jesus died on the cross for you.
The stuff that's going on today is being done by people who sell out their principles, to harm children, to do whatever they do. And those people individually need to be confronted.
And I'm going to describe three characteristics. A new type of violence that's sweeping our country, our schools, our streets. There used to be a virtuous elite, a core of heroes and saints that very much influenced any culture and democracy. The new elite practices what is called elitism. Namely, there is a dominant minority that makes a lot of noise and that uses violence to force its will upon others. Second, political mysticism is, of course, there is no God. It's my will or nothing. This is what the elite insists upon. No alternative, no compromise. In this mysticism, a tabula rasa, they would wipe the slate clean of anything that opposed it. And then after they destroyed life and property, they would ask for an amnesty and immunity. Thirdly, Satanism is the third characteristic of it. The world is built on order. There's a plan, so scientists are able to discover the laws of the universe. And in discovering the laws of the universe, men find harmony. This harmony, order, had to come from somewhere. It came from God. What is the essence of Satanism? The essence of Satanism is the destruction of that order. The order of law, the order of morality, the order of religion, the order of ethics, anything that you please.
The point of the spear of the gender agenda is the radical feminist movement, today's wolves in sheep's clothing, who whom we know by their fruits.
The last age is like a gray wolf, neither black nor white, but gray.
Let me raise the cry of alarm. The house of God is on fire. Souls are perishing in the flames. The sanctuary itself is ablaze. Help. Help, good people. Help our brother who is being murdered, our children being massacred, our kind father being done to death. They have sounded the alarm, vented their anger, and become a mighty army. Let us break their bonds asunder and throw away their yoke.
In 1981, Father Carlo Cafaro received a letter from...
This is a reference to Fatima, so I think it gets back to this line right here.
The Mother will raise up saints who will surpass in holiness most other saints. Chosen to oppose the enemies of God, they will be exceptionally devoted to the Blessed Virgin, illumined by her light, strengthened by her spirit, supported by her arms, sheltered under her.
This is why correct theology is so important, because based on everything that's going on, it's becoming quite clear that the church founded by Christ and the church that still the gates of hell won't prevail against is the Orthodox Church, and that is the ark, that is the shield here, the shadow that we take harborage under from Mary. So, you know, as somebody said in the chat, Pope Frank has been the best apologist for us Orthodox Christians, and God willing, more faithful Catholics who are upset with what's going on in their church. And I understand their ethnic and historical ties. I can understand why it'd be very difficult to convert, but God willing, many of them will, because we need more of God's soldiers in the one true body, united to Christ. So the next kind of goes into some of this Marianism, and then it ends pretty good here. So we'll check this out. We'll finish it up, and then we'll wrap up the stream. So again, thank you all for being here. Smash that like. We had a couple super chats come in. Tapio throws in $5. Thank you very much, Tapio. He says, thank you for covering this, bro. Please check out Kathy O'Brien's book, Transformation of America, and Sue Ford's book, Thanks for the Memories. Will do. Well, thank you very much, Tapio, for the support. And Nobody throws in $10. Thank you very much, Nobody. He says, keep doing what you do. Thank you very much, brother. And I absolutely will keep that in mind and keep doing what I do. So thank you so much for the support. Again, if you guys have any questions or comments or want to show some love right before we end here, please send something in on Streamlabs, Dono Chat, or YouTube. On Dono Chat, John Anand threw in $5. Says, have you seen the new American Orthodox film trailer yet? It's by the producer of Sacred Alaska documentary about Fort Ross and the early saints of America we're checking out. No, I have not seen that. Thank you very much, John Anand, for bringing that to my attention. I did see the first little snippet of Christianities with John Hears. If you guys didn't, Tucker Carlson recants an experience he had being mauled by a demon, and he tells John Hears about it for the documentary Christianities, who him and Father Peter came on, and we talked about that here on the channel. So I did check that out, but I haven't seen the new American Orthodox film. I'll have to check that out. And Nick throws in $10, says, thanks for the stream. I'm learning so much. Well, thank you very much, Nick, for the support, and I'm glad that it was beneficial to you. So anyways, that looks like all the super chats as of now. So let's get back to the end of our documentary.
The church teaches us that sexual intimacy has a twofold purpose, that it builds up a married couple in that union, that communion of persons that we see as God's original plan for sexuality. It's based on that the one flesh union, which is made possible by their complementarity, and it also is the way that God calls his children to cooperate with him in giving the gift of new life. And so properly ordered sexual intimacy has both of those aspects to it. The unitive, the one flesh union between a man and a woman, and the openness to procreation in the way that the intimate act is carried out.
So you can see this within Catholic theology especially reflections on the Trinity, that there's both unity and multiplicity. And so God is both one and three, insofar as God's love is overflowing. So it's generative, both inside the Godhead itself, but then also into creation. Right? So God's love overflows, so it communicates itself to creation and then shares in that life. So too, the love between spouses, unity and multiplicity. They're two people, they unite as one flesh in an act that is generous. Right? And so you can say generations, generosity, generative act, they all have the same root, genus, or gen. And then you can see from there that love overflows to the creation of new life. Multiplicity and unity, fruitfulness, generosity. And which is why it's not surprising that you see gender has that same root.
I think this is such a valuable time. My prayer for this time is that it will change things, that it will begin to add to the other people a million of brilliant people who are coming out and talking like I am. Let's keep this going. Let's have this be the start of the end of the LGBT movement, and let's make it today.
It was Cicero who said that true law is right reason in agreement with nature. And it is a sin to try to abolish this law. He was talking about natural law. Take Cicero and Aristotle, Roman and Greek, both before Christ. And both of them had this inherent understanding that there is a natural order to things. And that's something, too, that the church understands, right? The idea of faith and reason, fides et ratio. Faith and reason reinforce one another. And so do faith and freedom. Ronald Reagan talked about faith and freedom being the twin beacons that brighten the American sky. And if you take away one of those beacons, well, the sky is less light, it's darker, and it's harder to navigate yourself around. Faith helps navigate freedom. Faith is like the rudder for freedom. If you just have freedom without faith, it can be rudderless, and that's what leads to licentiousness.
Maybe God is stirring us, bringing us to the brink of danger, in order that we might begin to examine ourselves and restore Jefferson, the dignity of man, and the belief in God. Our nation is too full of those that are crying down. Down with the universities, down with schools, down with the churches, down with teachers, down with government, down with the police. Can you build anything down? You cannot. Certainly time in our nation to change our words. And let's begin now to use the word up. Up from all of this filth. Up from this violence. Up from this indifference of courts. Up to the hid battlements of eternity. Up to God.
When the world is in its best balance, what's usually going on is that men are running the world and women are running society. They run the home. And in our America, when women were doing this at the height of women running society, almost everybody was going to church or synagogue during those times. And they ran their home according to the 10 Commandments, so that the children learned that from infancy. And then from there, this 10 Commandment behavior would go out into all of industry, all of the institutions, the schools, everywhere, because it was all formed in the home, so that we had healthy communities and healthy society.
The Trinity itself being a family. And look at the original Holy Family. It's Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. There you have a father and a mother and a child. So I think in many ways, the faith is speaking to us and telling us that there's an inherent model there, both supernatural and natural as well, supported by natural law and biblical law, which calls for a mother and a father and for children to be raised as part of the family.
I would pray to God that we could have some sort of mass conversion here in the country where women will realize that they have the most powerful position. As Father George Rutler says, the most powerful person on earth is a mother.
I love that. I think that's where we ended, is the sneaky Orthodox cross that got put in this film. Maybe it was supposed to be a Byzantine Catholic. I'm not sure, but it's just music and it kind of fades into the credits from here. But great documentary, right? Yeah, it had some Catholic stuff that maybe we Orthodox wouldn't agree with, but overall, I think this is one of the best documentaries, especially religious documentaries, trying to expose the underpinnings of the gender agenda, the trans phenomenon, Alfred Kinsey's work, how existentialism and philosophy relates to all this stuff, how our relationship to God is the only reorienting force that has a ripple effect within our societies to try to move it back towards source. And so I wanted to share it with you. Again, a major thank you to FDA for sending it to me. I watched it with my wife. She loved it as well. I saw her in the chat earlier. So thank you very much, FDA. God bless you and the family. I hope you guys are doing well. So again, that documentary is called A Wolf's in Sheep's Clothing, The Gender Agenda. Part 1, 2, and 3 is on a gentleman's YouTube channel named Kenneth Ray Parsad. So you guys can check that out if you want. But this basically concludes the stream. Again, the big takeaway is that for these existentialists, for really all these nominalists, it's existence precedes essence. They reject the metaphysical categories of our Christian faith, and therefore we need to be aware of why our philosophy and how our theology affect our society and the ways in which we live our lives, and that this really is stemming out of the universities and such. So anyways, guys, thank you so much. I will see you on the next one. And thank you all for the support. Oh, and we just had a gifting of some memberships. Shout out to Derek Franklin, just gifted 5 COTEL Crew memberships. Thank you so much, Derek. Really, really appreciate that, my man. And welcome to anybody who got those for the first time. First Person Q, Bill Hicks, Fredo Franzarelli, G Money, Archeon 7, and oh, that was it. So thank you very, very much, Derek Franklin. Do appreciate it. And I will see you guys Sunday for our next stream, which I think will be an Orthodox view on Islam. Should be a fun one. So I will see you all then. As always, until next time, God bless.